Afternoon and a warm welcome to all the Petplan viewers out there on this what is actually slightly damp and dreary Sunday afternoon, but we hope to cheer things up a little bit for you today by answering your dog behaviour questions. So my glamorous helper Kim has some questions for us, so fire away Kim with your first question.
Okay Nick, the first question is, our German Shepherd Cross destroys every single toy he gets, and he definitely gets plenty of walks. Why might this be? Okay,
so destructive behaviour in any dog can have it can be there for any number of reasons. And one of the main reasons is simply that some dogs are much more prone to chew than others. Now you say your German Shepherd is crossed with something, so certainly German Shepherds have a very powerful set of jaws and your dog clearly likes to chew. The question often is, what exactly are you giving your dog to placate that chewing? Because it's not that we want to stop the dog chewing, it's important that the dog chews appropriate things, so toys that are made for dogs. I won't give brand names on air, but there are lots of very good dense chews out there, ranging, one example is a hollow rubber toy. This can be stuffed with food, like a moist food, and then it could be frozen, and that could take the dog a good 15-20 plus minutes to empty that, and what the contents in that device could be apart from its daily food allowance, so that you're not really spoiling the dog with anything, you're in a way getting him to work for his existing food. Now many of the well-made products do last and they are pretty much indestructible, but of course there's always exceptions to the rule. If on the other hand your dog is quite keen on working on a like more of a nylon or plastic device suitable for dogs, the contents of these devices are usually what we call inert, so it doesn't hurt the dog if they should ingest it. So you do find a good number of nylon based products, and some dogs will quite happily chew on those. I saw online just this week a product which was shaped like a T, so the dog actually sort of puts his claws on the T shape and holds it to the ground, and then coming up from it that had lots of spikes going around it, and the dog might just chew on that as it is, or you could possibly put something tasty in and amongst those spikes to keep the dog's interest, and that I thought looked a rather good new item which I've not seen before. So it's really a case of making sure that your dog is chewing something appropriate, because of course we don't want the dog chewing furniture or anything that it shouldn't have, remote controls and so on. Many dogs will still chew even though they're very well exercised, so I would encourage you not to see it as a problem in itself, and if your dog is a chewer, some are more so than others, then it's really more a case of finding something which is appropriate for your dog. Maybe take your dog into a pet shop with you. Many pet shops are geared up and welcome having you into the store so that we can look on a one-to-one basis what's actually required for you and your dog. Okay, so I hope that helps. Again, chewing's not a problem, it's really what it's chewing. Make sure it's safe and appropriate for the dog. I'm not a fan of giving dogs things like slippers and so on, because in essence it's inappropriate. The materials could give the dog, I was going to say indigestion problems, but that could be the least of your concerns. It's really about the dog ingesting something which is not appropriate for it. So that's really at the top of the list. Thanks for that question.
We've got another question here from Lucy. What behaviour changes are normal as a dog gets older? My Labrador Retriever is 11.
Okay, so that's a really good question, and clearly with an 11-year-old dog you may well be seeing some changes in your dog, because your dog is well into the realms of senior age, and without doing my dog age calculator, you know, we have a dog there which is probably 70-80-year-old human as an equivalent. Now, many dogs can go, just as humans, I hasten to add, can go right to the end of their lives without any loss of their mental faculties, and even their physical abilities can remain excellent right to the end. Now, I have, interestingly, a 13-year-old Border Terrier. She'll be 14 this Christmas. And just this last 6 to 9 months, we have noticed that she is either, we're going to go to the vets with her, but she's either becoming selectively deaf, which I think might be a part of the issue, or she is, and I think it is the case, she is partly losing her hearing. But apart from that, I would say that she is as normal. You know, she's pretty plucky, she can still walk, although on that physical note, her energy is not quite as high as it was. She may well run out of steam earlier than she used to do. So I think the main things that come to mind with a dog as it ages are things like its mental capacity and ability to do things that you may have always done with your dog. You might see those being less carried out less enthusiastically. So we have the mental, we have the physical. You may see your dog less active, maybe not even wanting to go out for walks. You can have that whole spectrum, so you just need to roll with it a little. And then, of course, in older dogs, it would not be unusual to see more ailments coming through, where you might think that, you know, elements of the dog's digestive system, or maybe its coat, or skin, or teeth. All of these are examples of areas that can deteriorate, basically, in an older dog. Okay, so if, can I say, you have any concerns about your dog's actual wellness, then you should take your dog to a vet for a checkup. I know not too far from me a dog that was really quite old and not looking too well. He was given a new medication to increase his blood flow, that's my understanding, and that dog has improved immensely. He's much more chipper and sprightly, and he seems to be having a new lease of life. So work in combination with your vet, first of all, if you think there's something of a physical level occurring. So I think that's it. The physical, the mental, and the actual physical well-being of your dog are the sorts of things I would consider. Given that we have time today, let me also go on and explain that the other things, such as bedding, and is your dog truly warm and dry? We're coming into the autumn now. It's a very wet day outside. I woke up this morning, my heating had actually clicked on, so it goes to show how much cooler it's getting. So with older dogs, making sure that their bones are not resting on the floor, and that the bedding has some adequate density is something really important, and especially so with bigger dogs, because even an old big dog could be approaching 30-40 kilos, and that is a lot of weight to have on a bed, whereas little Pip, my Border Terrier, she's about 8 kilos. So but these are all things that are also worth taking into account. In that same sort of spirit, diet as well can change. Naturally, we would hope that your dog's teeth are clean and all in good shape, but if your dog's having any teeth problems, then particularly hard food might be something for you to think on, whether your dog's able to ingest that properly, and indeed whether the quantity of the food and the quality of the food is up there as well. So I will probably leave that one there, because I will certainly go into a ramble, but those are the sorts of things I would look at there. So thank you for that one, Kim. What else have we got?
Okay, we've got one from Emma here. My dog has a problem with same-sex aggression. Please help. I don't know what to do to stop this. Okay,
this is in terms of under the umbrella heading of dog-to-dog aggression. We can then have many subsectors of that condition. So we may have, just to give you some quick examples, on lead aggression. Some dogs are only aggressive when they're on the lead. Some dogs are only aggressive towards other males, assuming it's a male, or other females, assuming your dog is female. On the basis of past experience, I would make an assumption that your dog is male, because same-sex aggression within the male of the canines is much more common, and I will run with that because you don't state which your dog, whether your dog's male or female. So we can also have other forms of dog-to-dog aggression, whereby it may be when I have an interesting one recently where the dog was only aggressive towards people that were not walking dogs. So you can have all sorts of seemingly peculiar variations upon that theme. And if we were really sitting down and writing headings for that, you could easily come up with at least a dozen and then more on different types of aggression. So let's assume your dog is a male and he's showing aggression to other males. One thing that comes to mind just quickly is the castrated or neutered status of your dog. If your dog, because there's a lot of information missing there, and if I was having a conversation with you, I would be able to fill the information out a lot more. But if your dog was, say, under 12 months, male, uncastrated, and those are assumptions I wouldn't be surprised that we could make in this instance, then although I think you should make the decision in consultation with a behaviourist and your vet, you may well find that castration could be a quick and direct route to addressing that behaviour. The trouble with castration, of course, is that once it's done, you can't undo it. So that's the importance of thinking carefully about what's right for your dog. Okay. In any event, whether it's the same dog or a dog of the opposite sex, your dog, we don't want your dog to behave in this way. So it's important that we look at that behaviour. Because dog-to-dog aggression, and whilst I'm very happy to talk about it and to give you ideas, is such a complex subject, I would encourage you to seek out the help and guidance of an experienced and qualified behaviourist, because that is the best way, because every case is different and there could be certain nuances in your dog's behaviour which could make a significant difference. So I would put that as the bottom line: seek help anyway. If you can make controlled, on a more practical note, if you can make controlled and positive meetings with other dogs of the same sex, whether it's male or female, it doesn't matter, that will help. You may well need to muzzle your dog before making those introductions, because safety first, as always. You need to protect the other dog and you need to protect yourself and other people around you. So safety is of absolute importance. If you can make meetings with other dogs of the same sex that you know that those dogs are calm and well behaved, that's really important. If you meet up with other reactive dogs, that really could not ruin it completely, but it won't help and it won't bring you forward. So very often, if we can proactively seek out friends, family with other dogs that you know those dogs are really good, generally speaking, with other dogs, then you could make very gradual meetings with other dogs. Now that doesn't mean, just to elaborate a little, that you take them in the park, you let them both off and see how it goes, because you are courting disaster if you do that, depending on the severity of your dog's behaviour. So both dogs will need to be on lead, or at least training lines in the region of 30-50 feet, depending on the environment and the behaviour of the respective dogs. And you don't expect on that visit to come away with a new best friend in the other dog. It may take repeated visits with that other dog, where you, on each subsequent visit, you can reduce the distances to that dog. If your dog is food motivated, and even the same goes with the visiting dog, just get them to sit, to be aware of each other's presence, to feed them if they're food motivated, maybe to let them have a little tussle with a toy if that pleases them as well. So basically the meeting is calm, there's no conflict, the meeting is managed, and that it's safe. If you can do that with one dog and build it up, and maybe over a few days and weeks, actually make that dog a friend. Because very often people will say to me, well, my dog has this particular variation of dog to dog aggression, but he gets on really well with my sister's dog, or he gets on very well with the other dog at home. So dogs, when that happens, it tells you that your dog can actually be sociable with other dogs, but it's making your dog sociable with all other dogs on a more random and spontaneous basis, and to achieve that does require time. So the reason I wanted to elaborate a little on that subject is that the subject of dog to dog aggression as that umbrella heading is so commonly asked of me. It probably constitutes 3/4 at least of the work I do, and I'm constantly surprised at how many little variations there are. I think you could readily build a scale of dog to dog aggression, and we could go, let's say, anything from a 0 to certainly 20 minor levels within that behaviour. Okay, and so it just goes to show how many different types of behaviour there are under that heading, and also how many different degrees of severity there are. So I know this will be of relevance to many of you listening. So yeah, I think we'll leave it there, because otherwise it will turn into a 3 to 4 hour consultation, which is actually the sort of thing that we're looking at when I do dog behaviour consultations, because to get really truly to the bottom of it, to understand why it's happening, and to put together a specific recipe for you and your dog, that takes that long. Okay.
Okay, Nick. We've got another question here. Don't have a name of a person who sent this question in, but they sent it in during the week. When I take my 2-year-old male cockapoo for a walk, he'll run off as soon as he smells something interesting and won't come back, no matter how many times we call him. He eventually does come back, but it can be quite a while later. How can I rectify this? Any advice would be much appreciated.
Okay. Firstly, folks, just before I answer that, please be sure to like and share the video. There's usually a little like button on your screen, and if you wish to share it as well, that would be very welcome. It helps the Facebook juice flow, so thank you for that. Okay, so effectively, did the lady give a name? Or
No, she didn't. No.
So what we have here is a working breed. The spaniels, of course, were bred to sniff and to hunt and to get into places and to get into small places with a degree of determination, because that's really why we as humans developed the spaniels as a breed, to work alongside men as we hunted for various quarry. Now, what your dog is doing is, as I would describe it, is self-hunting. Because there's nothing wrong with a dog hunting and following its nose and being instinctive. But when it's doing it all of its own accord and you're there frustratingly waiting for your dog to return, then you know that something's gone wrong along the way. Now, I carried out a little puppy visit last week, and I was explaining to the couple that with puppies we are in this valuable stage of prevention rather than cure. And it just brought to mind, because what I was explaining to them is when they first take their puppies to the park or to the fields in the countryside, don't just go into the field and think, well, this is perfect with my 14-week-old puppy, and just unclip the dog and then expect your dog to come back reliably, because very often it will not. Because actually, why should it? Now, we would hope naturally that the dog won't actively run away from you, but there is no reason why your dog would do that. But a dog, when it is when the genetic makeup of that dog has been developed over the years by us to follow its nose, then we could have a problem, because the dog could literally forget itself and become wrapped up, as it were, in the whole excitement of the experience. So how do we stop this happening in the first place? which is a small comment I can make, and then how can we address your particular problem. So in the first place with younger dogs, I would never personally take a very young dog in its first month or two, maybe 3, into an open field and just let it go. I would use a long training line. Training lines to be useful for their function are usually about 30 to 50 feet. If you look online, you can certainly find 50 feet lines quite readily, but they're for some reason they're not easily available in the shops. So 50-foot line for an active dog is a pretty good choice. Then you can allow the dog to be a dog. Of course, they should be allowed to go around and sniff and to be natural hunters, but you will do your training bit by recalling the dog back on a regular basis. So there's a basic recipe for a good basic recall. That would be your long line. It would be you having a high value reward. Usually food is effective. We can think of something very high value, like little slithers of chicken, maybe tiny bits of liver. Some dogs respond really well to bits of carrot, whatever does it for you and your dog. The other element in terms of attraction is your voice. So your tone of voice will need to be really bright and clear. Whether you're male or female, we can still do our own versions of that, okay? And your body language, so that will need to be open. You'll need to be cooping down on the floor, assuming we have a young dog in the instance I'm giving you. And so we're making coming back to us non-intimidating, very happy experience, and the dog loves coming back because he gets a rub up, he gets the food, the praise, and he's kept with you for say 10, 20, 30 seconds. You might do a sit, a stay, and then you can let him go again, because we don't want your dog to think that the recall always means we're going home. It will ultimately, but if you do lots and lots of nice recalls for no particular reason, then the dog isn't really to know when the game is up. So whilst I'm sort of going through what we could do with a young dog, that's exactly how we would address an older dog not coming back. So you will be restricting your dog's physical freedom for the short term, because you'll need to come back on yourself, because in fact you've got some gaps in the in the training from previous months and years, okay? But that's okay. Dogs are very responsive generally to new, fresh input. So we do put a long line on the dog. We will be carrying really high value food with us. If it isn't food, then something like a squeaky ball on a rope you can tussle with your dog as a reward when he comes back. To do a semi-formal sit and wait, when the dog comes back to you, stand on the long line, because many dogs will come back, have the treat and think, okay, I'm off. That's not the rules of the game. He needs to wait with you and only actually be released when you say so. There's a little subtle but important point there. Okay, and making sure that you're combining the body language and that tone of voice. And then really it's a case of repetition, repetition, repetition. I usually offer to customers a concept of what I call a 3-stage recall. Step 1, you hold the line for 1 month as a minimum, whilst carrying out lots and lots of recalls under various circumstances. Step 2, you let the line go and the dog trails the line. So the dog isn't loose because he's still got now this 50-foot umbilical cord trailing on the floor, but that's your means to get in there really quickly and to reinforce the recall if you issue it and it's ignored. And then step 3, provided at the end of that second month of him trailing the line, he is coming back nicely and you're thinking this is great, then you can do one of 2 things. For simplicity, I just test it and just take the line off and see how your dog is, because then you're only back to where you were in the beginning anyway. So just take the line off and then you can test the recall. You can always put the line back on over coming days as you wish to make a blend over into your dog being completely free. Or another little crafty trick is that you can you'll ruin the line in the process, but you can just take a few feet off the length of the line each, every 2 or 3 days. So the line just goes down gradually because dogs can't measure, and it just gives you this gradual exit of having your dog on the long training line. So those are the elements: a training line, attractive rewards with food, and attractive body language and voice over an extended period. You know, you're looking at, for most junior or adult dogs, at least a 3-month program. It may, in some instances, be overkill. You may even need just a month of that whole process. But I would rather you had a little bit of overkill, so you know it really sealed and addressed the problem. Yes, I'd rather you do that than maybe just do it quick and be a bit hasty. One fault some people fall into with the long line is that they think, oh, he's okay, I'll let him off. And then they will contact me saying, yes, he didn't come back, I lost control again. So that 3-month and 3-step project, holding, dragging and removing of the long line, can be very efficient. So slightly long answer, I'm sorry, but it's quite a big subject actually, the recall, and again it's easily one of the most commonly asked. But that simple little method will go a long way, if not all of the way, with most recall issues. So thank you again for that question.
Okay.
Thank you, Kim. What do we have?
We have a 6-year-old rescue dog who's a crossbreed. At night he sleeps in the kitchen and goes to bed quite happily, but in the middle of the night he'll get up and just start barking. We've checked to see if he needs the bathroom, which the majority of the time he doesn't. Why might he be barking, and is there anything we can do to help make him more comfortable?
Yes, okay. So what this comes under the heading of separation anxiety, and if we were to look for as I was suggesting earlier with different behaviour problems, if we were looking for subheadings, this one would be called nighttime separation anxiety. Okay, that's most likely. I say it's most likely because there could, in theory, be something waking your dog up and distressing him at that time, especially if you find that the timings are quite consistent. That may also coincide with the dawn, basically, because was it back 4 a.m. they said?
Middle of the night.
Middle of the night, so probably not a daybreak issue, but there can be sometimes mileage in having a bit of detective work. So if something like a central heating system is coming on, or the click of a radiator, some dogs can be quite sensitive and a little bit phobic to seemingly random noises. So worth having a little think on that one, especially if you feel that the timings are a bit consistent. Putting that to one side, I suspect that, and I will run with this idea that it's what I would call nighttime separation anxiety. Sometimes we can waste a lot of unnecessarily energy and worry on why it's happening, because ultimately what we're always looking at is how do we stop it? How do we make your dog, as you say, feel more comfortable? And I would share your concern entirely in that respect. Now, when we return to a dog, because nobody wants their dog to be upset and to cry during the night, but putting this simply and shortly, you may well have some mileage in resolving in yourself not to return to the dog, because this greatly helps set the dog's expectations. If your dog is getting into a habit, because dogs are very habitual, some more so than others, and your dog may be in that category, that if the dog knows that you will come back reliably, and that you disturb the night even a bit further by giving the opportunity for a toilet break, and I don't blame you, I would do the same with my dog. But the interesting thing there is that you said, well, most of the time he doesn't need to go to the toilet. So I would actually try an approach where you say, right, well, we'll just leave him. Okay, the longest, what I would actually do is to set an early hour. So you might say to yourself, well, the earliest we're prepared to go down to him is 6 a.m. And so if, for example, he went to bed at 11 p.m, you would say, we're not going down to him now until 6 a.m. And that's, for an adult dog that doesn't need the toilet and that just may be getting a bit anxious that he realises you're not there, is very often a fast track to him to accept and understand that you're not coming back. And that is a little bit of tough love there, but actually dogs can perpetuate that sort of behaviour for months, and even in some cases years, and that's very stressful for the dog, not to mention of course for you, especially if you are coming down in the middle of the night. Most people I see that are in that sort of scenario, when I sit before them, it's no more than half an hour, and they're yawning and looking really quite tired, and that is simply because they've been tending to their dog in the middle of the night for far too long. And so I have found on more instances than I care to remember that just making this blanket condition that we're not going down until that early hour can make the world of difference. But of course it could well take a few nights for the dog to understand that you're not returning. Regarding the 6 a.m. returns, what you would then do is, once that seems to be working, you could begin to push it back a little, about 10-15 minutes, depending on what you think is appropriate, for each every other week. And then so after a month, you'll be, if you're going 15 minutes per week, you'll be an hour later, until you get to the time where you would like to come down. So if you would like to come down to your dog at 8 a.m, then you've got 2 hours to build up, okay, once you know that your dog can cope with 6 a.m. And that's again, it's a good, simple and traditional way of doing it, but it can get really good results. It's just a case of being a bit firm with yourself, not going down to the dog. What else could you do to make the dog more comfortable? If the dog, and very often people say, oh no, we tried putting him in a crate, he doesn't like being in a crate, and that's fine. Sometimes doing that can be more stress than it's worth. So if that's the case for you, don't worry. But if, for example, you would say, oh no, he has a crate and he likes going in it, we use it in fact when we go on holiday, then that could be a nice avenue for you to pursue. So for example, provided you had space, you could set a crate up in the dog's sleeping space. You could put him in the crate, lots and lots of bedding. You could then, provided it doesn't get too warm in there, you could also cover the crate over at night with a thin sheet, just to give it a more insular feeling. Now this is all on the assumption that your dog will go in and do that. Many will, some won't, so you'll need to pick your way through the situation. But if you think there's some mileage to be had with the crate, that can help a lot. You might also like to consider speaking to your vet regarding various calming supplements. I'm not a fan, unless something is extremely wrong, but I'm not a fan of medicating dogs. It only suppresses behaviours, and then when we stop the medication, we can easily see those behaviours come to the fore again. Plus, all medication has side effects. So if we can do this in a natural, positive way, gradual way, so that you break the habit at night time, that would be my preferred method. But speak to your vets. There are some sort of more nutritional calming remedies available, which are only available at vets, okay, or rather through veterinary outlets. So I hope that helps. It is again a broad subject. I hope I'm sort of reading in between the lines correctly and giving you a good guess at what I think you're going through. But good luck with that. Thank you.
Okay, our next question is from Kelly Marie. My 5-year-old Labradoodle jumps constantly, especially when people come to the house. She literally won't calm down and continuously jumps at them, at whoever it is, and they can't even sit down. How can I get her to calm down?
Good question. Very common scenario. So Labradoodles, lovely breed, big dog. Some can be very big, energetic. They love people, and I'm sure that the people coming into your home will love your dog. And so you can have this Did the inquiry say how old the dog was? I'm sorry.
Where am I? 5-year-old.
5-year-old, sorry, I missed that. So a mature dog, you see, doing what we would normally associate as puppy-like behaviours. But that's not unusual if puppy-type behaviours are not checked at puppyhood, and you can see how basically they continue for life if not looked at at earlier stages. This is on the assumption you have that dog from puppyhood. I won't overtalk this one because in theory this is very simple to overcome, and the simple answer is you put a lead on your dog as people enter the home. Just a few thoughts around that. You can help with the good timing of putting the lead on by, for example, placing a lead on a hook by the front door so that you're never really scrabbling to find a lead. You could get your visitor to give you a quick text or phone call to say, I'm just parking up, if you are not already aware of that, and that would also be a good time for you to put your dog on the lead. Now, this is not a case of a no greeting, it's what I would call a delayed greeting. So at the moment you have, and if I were in your position, I would also have no control over your dog's behaviour. And so you'll need to think realistically, because telling your dog to sit and to stay just using obedience, as you've possibly found, is not going to be effective with a dog that just wants to say hello and is very excited. So you will it's really about having some physical control in a moderate way. So we don't need to be shouting, we don't need to be using any harsh handling or rough handling. It's just a case of you standing your ground whilst your dog is jumping around and keeping him away from your guest until he's settled. Now that may, depending on your dog, might be a bit shorter for your dog because he's quite mature in years, but you may find with practice that he can settle within 5 minutes. It may take 10 or 15 minutes, it doesn't really matter, but with practice, and that's another key word, we do need to practice this, or rather how long it takes your dog to settle can become less and less in terms of time as you go on. And I know many of you will be interested in this as a subject because at the top of most of my behaviour consultation sheets I'm writing down greetings, visitors as subject headings on my sheet because unsurprisingly I'm a visitor going into that home and coping with that actual process. Now I always ask customers to put their dogs on the lead when I enter the home. Now that's not just because over the years I have had a few nips and dogs will sort of run in and be overprotective, so that measure deals with that, but it gives the owner a tool right from the very beginning of control, of putting them in control, and for me to be able to talk them through how to manage the dog in that situation whilst I, as the visitor, am doing my best to ignore the dog. Okay? Because if they are holding the dog and doing their best to control him and his jumping up, and I'm saying, oh, isn't he gorgeous, and I'm trying to have some fuss and affection with him, then I'm going to be clashing directly with the approach that they're wishing to address. So the basic recipe is lead on your dog when people enter the home, and that your visitor is ignoring your dog truthfully with no looking, talking or touching until the dog is calm. Then let's fast forward 10-15 minutes and think and there's a number of ways you can do this, but let's come forward in time and think, well, here is the dog now, he's much calmer, we're sat down, I've got my cup of tea, and the dog is laid on the floor with his head on his paws. That then would be the appropriate time, if not a little sooner, to actually say hello to the dog. Now the owner could walk up to me as the visitor, get the dog to sit because he's much more likely to comply with his newfound calmness, and then I could offer the dog a treat, or I could let him sniff my hand and just have a little stroke. Depends on what does it for the dog and what feels appropriate within the big picture. That's how I would do it. Lead on, ask your guest to ignore, and then practice, 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 because that is what makes all the difference. Just a little footnote there. Even with your own homecomings as family members, so let's imagine that it's mum, dad and 2 children, a little traditional, but that's not uncommon. Those people coming home should be ignoring the dog until he's calm. And then once he's calm, we can call him up, ask him to sit, because the little mantra that I often encourage people to remember is that sit equals hello. Not jumping up, not fuss, not excitability. So once the dog's sitting, then we, even as family members, can have calm greetings. That's exactly how I do it with my own young dogs as they come into the house. And my dogs, I'm pleased to say, don't jump up. They are excited and happy to see people, but there's no jumping up. And of course, it could be said that a dog jumps up in the house could, in all likelihood, jump in public, and we can't have dogs jumping, especially a Labradoodle, jumping on people in public either. So went off at slight tangents there, but it's still within that subject of getting your dog to say hello calmly and politely, and that needs to be guided from us as humans down to the dog. We can't expect dogs to understand how to say hello to people. This is what, in a way, training and rearing a well-mannered dog is all about. So that's a good question, thank you.
Okay, my male Jack Russell is 4 years old and has been castrated, but he gets very protected over things, mainly his toys. If for whatever reason we have to move the toy or stroke him when he's chewing them, he'll start to growl and has gone on occasion to bite me. Otherwise, he's a very loving dog and so gentle. How can I deal with this behaviour?
Okay, thank you for that, Kim. So the subject of possessiveness, or to give it another slightly more technical heading, resource guarding, because it's a resource and dogs can guard or protect or keep to themselves pretty much anything. Could be food, could be toys, as you're saying in this instance. It could be its owner. It could even be its own body. Some dogs don't even like being touched. So those are some other broader examples of resource guarding or protective behaviour. In terms of overcoming any behaviour problem, we need to start somewhere to put things in your favour in terms of the owner, and then to develop it. So we think, well, ideally we would be able to give those items back to the dog, but without that conflict later on down the line. I think it's fair to say that you could take an approach that you say, okay, no toys in the house. And I think provided your dog gets adequate, I'm not saying you should do this, but it is an approach, provided your dog gets adequate exercise and stimulation and that his needs are being met, then do we need to have these items in the home? Now, in that vein of thinking, it wouldn't be wrong in the beginning to say, let's get a plastic box, let's put all of his bones and chews and toys and things that he's protective over, let's take them all away. And we will then begin to gradually give those back to your dog. And that's the method I would take for you, because this is safe, and you need to be realistic about how you build this up. So as I say, you start with a bit of a removal of everything in the beginning, and then we can build it up, because the dog doesn't see these items as luxury items, if you see what I mean, but really in terms of he has a right to them, and that he sees them purely as his, and that you're not allowed to interfere at all. Now, if he was just a little bit grumbly or he ran away with the items, that's one thing, but when you say that your dog will or has bitten you, then that could be other people as well. You will most likely tolerate that behaviour in your dog to a degree, but other people may not tolerate it if there's some sort of accident that occurs, which is perfectly possible with your dog or with other people as they come to visit the home. So these are all sort of bigger knock-on effects that we may not think about initially, but because I also work in that realm of seeing the consequences of a dog's behaviour towards people, especially aggressive consequences, then it's something we really want to head off. So step one, remove all his toys. Any toys that you give him should be on your say-so. And I won't go into great detail here because again this could become very complex, but the gist of this is that you sit down and begin to develop with your dog a little hold and give exercise. Most dogs, and I'm sure yours would be the same because he seems to enjoy his items that he does have, is that if you provide him with an item and you say hold it, most dogs will naturally sort of open their mouths and hold it. Also, but the trick is being able to get that item back off your dog without there being any conflict. So one easy way to do that hold and give, you could change the words if you wish, but those are the words I use. But one way to build that up is that you start with very low value items and then you work your way up the ladder, as it were, of more interesting items. So so up here, this could be a rawhide chew. Let's say that your dog sees those as extremely high value, or it might be many owners will say, well, he's got hedgehog, his toy hedgehog, that's his favourite toy. So that's what you would put up there, and then coming down from that, you would need to pick toys out of the toy box that you think are about half a dozen gradients, okay? Because the essence is you practice the hold and give a few days running with that low key item. It is okay to swap the item for food if you think that helps, but just to say, if you feel in any way that the food is causing a problem, or your dog's even becoming possessive over the food, which is a possibility, then I wouldn't use that method. So we're really working our way up, but you can swap the item for food. So if you say to the dog, give, and the dog is being a bit firm, hard-mouthed is the phrase I was looking for, you could get some high-value food and actually just hold it on your dog's nose. And if he wants to have that food, he will have to eject the item. So it is quite permissible to do a swap for some food. You can fade the food thing out later on, but it can help get you through your ladder of those increasingly difficult items. Only progress up the ladder onto the next high value item when you really are certain that your dog happily gives up when you use the give command, that item. Okay, so that's just the framework of the idea I'm going to give you. 6 items from low to high. That process could take you 2, 3, 4 weeks. Don't rush it, okay? Only progress when you're content that it's working well. As a side note, dogs that can behave in that way and even feel that it's permissible to bite you to defend those items could well have other areas in the dog's life and in the home, actually, that the dog has free access to, that I may also stop initially. For example, in no particular order, access upstairs, free access onto the sofa without permission. I'm all good with dogs coming upstairs. My dogs come on the sofa upstairs. This morning I had little Pip, the Border Terrier, on the bed, but all of these things happen with an invitation. Neither of my dogs would dream of doing it off their own back, and that's only because we've done it that way from the very beginning. So if your dog does have a lot of liberties and freedoms in the home that you think, yeah, I suppose he might grumble at me if I push him off the sofa, or he is rude at the doorways, he will rush out in front of me. Those are little areas that I would encourage you to address, because they all feed into the dog's mindset. And that mindset is, for you, your dog saying, I don't truly respect or maybe even trust you, and actually will run this on my terms. For many dogs, we can rub along and not worry too much about that. But of course, when there is aggression to the owner and some real resource guarding, then I think it's worth sort of throwing open casting our net rather, so that we can look at any other behaviours that could help improve your main concern, which is the possessive behaviour. So very good question. As you can tell, potentially quite lengthy answer there, because there are so many other little ramifications, but again, very common area. Thank you.
Okay, this is from Carol Ann. My Staffy is too used to being with me, so that when I leave him with a friend, he cries and runs away. He's a flight risk with others, so I can't trust him. What can I do?
So thank you, Kim. So that again is separation anxiety. Now you would think in most cases, and in fact it's true, that a dog that has separation anxiety, you could leave that dog with a human, doesn't matter which human, and he or she would be okay. But that again isn't always the case. I recall a case of separation anxiety where the husband could go out, leaving the dog with the wife, and the dog was okay. But when the wife wanted to go out, even though the husband was there and trying to reassure the dog was getting himself in a right pickle over the fact that he was left alone. So again, the subject of separation anxiety has lots and lots of little permutations that need to be taken on their own merits, and that's the beauty of sort of looking at these sorts of cases in more detail. But what she was saying, Kim, is that when she leaves this dog with other people, she's still not happy.
Yes, he cries and tries to run away from them, so she's worried that he might run away from them.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, okay. That is a difficult situation for you because, and I say it's difficult because you do need the cooperation of the people that's looking after him. Just off the top of my head, I think they will need to think very carefully about the management of him when he's there, so that he cannot try to run after you, or that he tries to run away thinking that he could find you, because he won't. The chances are you've jumped in your car and driven off to work. So that is something to be really aware of, and you'll need the cooperation of the people looking after him. Most doggy daycare facilities are extremely good in that respect, and they will try their best to accommodate the behaviours in various dogs. I think if I were having a conversation with you, I would be very interested as to, over a half day or a whole day, how he really is throughout that day. Can he, or does he actually settle after 30 odd minutes? And if so, then I think that's less of a concern, and I would just try to deal with that buffer of when you leave him. So I would just give you some simple ideas. When you go through the whole process, you're either walking or driving to the doggy daycare facility, just play that very, very, very low key. I wouldn't even really interact with him. When you go, I wouldn't love him up or hug him and tell him that you love him, that you'll see him later, because that will bring him up emotionally. Staffies are, you know, one of the most affectionate and loyal breeds you could wish to own, and this is, I feel, you know, a large part of why he can be that. I've seen lots of Staffies with separation anxiety because they are so affectionate and they do want to be with their owners all of the time. So, and of course it's not always practical. So definitely have a very low-key departures. Equally on your return to him, because I bet he's very excitable when you come back, that he is that you ignore him initially. Again, it sounds sort of a bit counterintuitive to do that, but just have a really, really low-key greeting, and so that you're not giving fuel to his anxious states, because he is anxious. A dog that it will behave in that way is very anxious about being left alone. Finally, thinking about what the carers are doing with him in your absence could be worth going through with the carers as well. So to think, if he's very food driven, I would try to use that. May or may not work with other dogs around, but you could, or rather they could, put him into a quiet room on his own. You could have his breakfast kept to one side. If that was a dried food, it could go into a slow release device, numerous of those on the market, or if it's a wet food, that could go into like a hollow rubber device, so that he's actually having to focus on something completely different. So I know it sounds a little, oh, give him food, he'll be okay, but you know, more times than I can recall, that simple approach can work. It really may work in your instance. So try it, work your way through different options that you could explore there so that we get him to focus on something other than the fact that he's on his own, and that's not so much of a concern for him. Now, also, I wouldn't be at all surprised if you had an issue when you left him alone in your home as well, because the fact is you're still not there with him, and that could be causing stress for him. So if that's the case, and I would imagine it would be, then I would get some behaviour help, because you have a much broader and further reaching issue of separation anxiety in your staffy. But it is treatable, but it just needs a nice little package or recipe putting together that works for you and your dog. So I hope that helps. Thank you. What have you got,
Okay.
Kim?
This is from Christina. I have a 2-year-old dog. He and his sister get plenty of walks and have easy access to go outside for the toilet. He can be left all day with his sister and have no accidents in the house, but every night without fail, when everyone goes to bed, he will do his business. We've tried things like limiting drinks after a certain time and making sure he goes out before we go to bed, and nothing works.
And what did it offer an age there?
2-year-old.
2-year-old. And were they a pair of dogs?
Yes, brother and sister.
Brother and sister. And sorry, I missed the initial parts. Was it male that's doing the wetting at night?
Yes, it's the male. Yeah.
Okay. I expect, given that they're litter mates, that they are sleeping together at night. Now, keeping litter mates or acquiring litter mates can be fraught with issues as you go on, because in a way you end up with two halves of one dog rather than two separate dogs which are independent and that can think for themselves. So you may, it's not something you can change, but I just wanted to recognise that sometimes having litter mates can lead to these sorts of issues occurring. Now, if it's the male, if he's not castrated, there might be something for you to think about in terms of a little further exploration. The question which we could do with answering is it urinating at night or is it marking at night? Now, both are in effect urinating to carry out the process, but a dog that's marking will come up to a corner of a kitchen cabinet, say, and persistently mark on that and maybe another spot. So if you find that it's marking, that's one thing. If you feel, on the other hand, that he is actually just peeing on, say, the mat near the back door, then you've got a bad habit in terms of his urination habits. Okay, hope you're with me. If it's marking, actually, again, although, as I've said at the beginning of this Facebook Live, if you feel that castration may help if he is uncastrated, then I would consider that. Okay, I've had many scenarios similar to that where castration has helped. If you think it's just inappropriate toileting and he's desperate and he needs to go, then actually introducing him into a crate could be a way forward, because very rarely will dogs urinate in their own sleeping space. The difficulty you have, and I am making an assumption here, so forgive me, but that they do sleep together, because most litter mates would, and most owners would not separate them, although for the record I do usually suggest keeping litter mates separate at night. So you may have a scenario where you try to get both dogs in the crate at night. If you've previously had them in a crate, then it could be something quite straightforward, and you may be able to return to that, because given that they're 2 years of age, I would make a guess and say, well, only 18 months ago they were still in the crate. So it may be a case of reinstigating a crate. You might need one that's large enough, well, you will need one that's large enough for both dogs, and you may find that sort of addresses it easily. and I would go down that road for a while. If there hasn't been a crate in use in the past, then I would consider setting about introducing one, so that you spend a week or two setting the crate up, feeding them in the crate, playing with them in the crate, and then you can begin to put their bedding in there at night, and then after a couple of weeks you could shut the door as well. So that, as always, make it a nice gradual increase along the way. So it's always a pleasure to answer your questions on Facebook Live with Petplan. As you can tell, it's a one-way conversation. I get one quick question and then I have to pad it out for you. But I hope those answers give you some help, folks. Thank you once again. Can I just tell you that I will be again live with Petplan here on Facebook November the 25th at 3 p.m. So thank you once again for joining me, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.